Well, something else we're all watching is the labor movement here in the United States. Well, we should be watching it. If you're not, I don't know what you're doing right now because workers are very much on the march and fighting back in a range of different companies and industries. And to discuss as much of this as we can get into in the time we have allowed, very, very, very honored to be joined here by John Russell, the freelance labor reporter based in Wheeling, West Virginia, with More Perfect Union, and also the author of the Holler newsletter. John, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you guys for having me on. And man, your last guest was cooking there. As a person from Appalachia, I think we need to keep our eye on the ball on this fentanyl conversation. The opioid addiction came directly from U.S. companies and hit hard in Appalachia. You guys have a great show. Thanks for having me.
No, I really appreciate that, and thank you so much. And I'm sure Kurt appreciates it as well. You know, we ended the year last year, John, with a couple big high-profile strikes at both Starbucks and Amazon right before Christmas. Caught a lot of people's attention. You know, I was in Central Virginia in my hometown, and everyone was talking about it. Not a lot of unions there, so it shows how it's really capturing a zeitgeist. I mean, talk to us, if you could, about the importance of, you know, efforts like this, like Starbucks, like Amazon, these big national brands that everyone has heard of, but that are such notorious union busters.
Yeah, I mean, Starbucks and Amazon and the rank and file workers that are making the progress there are showing the rest of the country what is possible when you step up in your workplace and you take power into your own hands. Because in the case of Starbucks, um, my buddy Kim Kelly writes about the tactic of salting being back, getting a job with the intent to unionize a store. There wasn't a Starbucks union, and then a few people got it in their heads to make one, and they did. And now it represents over something around 525 stores, 11,000 workers, stores being added at a rapid pace. Growing the power of this union to fight for their very first contract, in spite of all of the union busting tactics kind of finding a home at the same time, with guys like Howard Schultz kind of heading up the opposition there. But this was ordinary people at a place without a union. A lot of folks, the general public, are being reintroduced to the concept of unions, and it's at Starbucks and Amazon and these new unions taking place, they're showing us it's not just white guys in hard hats. This is anybody, anywhere. It can be two people at any workplace that join together and go through the process to make it happen. So it's really encouraging from Starbucks. I covered the Amazon labor union when they won a union election at the very first Amazon warehouse in 2022. This year, we saw them join up forces with the Teamsters as a way to significantly multiply their resources. The end of the year culminated with one of the biggest strike actions we've ever seen against, the modern company store of our time, Amazon. Important things are being won there, even as they're coming up against intense opposition, like recognizing Amazon as a joint employer of all of the people working in their service networks. So it's really rank and file members across the American labor movement that are showing us that a union is for everybody. Anybody can do it. And that is the most direct way to combat all of the failures of short-term electoral politics, whether that is a second term of Donald Trump or, pick any number of blunders from the Democrats, which I hope we can get into, like handing over control of the National Labor Relations Board 2 years earlier than it had to be, or failing to reappoint Lena Khan as chair of the FTC and leaving that decision to Donald Trump. When people are out there hungry for political representation and they see both parties failing them fantastically, what you can hang your hat on going into 2025 is the American labor movement, and there's plenty of evidence for that.
Mm-hmm.
John, I appreciate that you said all of that. And I want to ask you, moving aside to like the way the media treats this stuff too, because I do notice, I mean, it does get attention when there's negotiations in like the new Starbucks union. It does get attention when Amazon union is negotiating. It does get attention when you have these people at these like, diners organizing and unionizing and pushing for higher wages, hotel workers, the longshore workers, like, and I could go on and on of all these things that have been happening over the last few years, but it's always framed by this obviously very capitalist media that pushes a ruling class narrative in this way where it's like everything is so isolated. Like these are all just single things happening here and there, but like don't try to, thread the needle. And so I'm just curious, in reality, is there a threading of the needle we should be seeing here? Because it does seem like there's been almost like an explosion of labor activity in this country after, of course, like decades and decades of attacks on unions and, this growing gig economy that's made it even more difficult to organize.
Yeah, there's so many directions to take that question. I think of the cartoonist who recently resigned from the Washington Post after her editorial cartoon showed, the tech billionaires Zuckerberg and Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, all contributing to Trump's, inaugural committee. That was what was depicted in the cartoon. The Post killed it. Of course, they're owned by Jeff Bezos, and then this cartoonist resigns. I think that's just kind of an indication of the pro-corporate bias that is covering this resurgence in labor. But it is a resurgence. I mean, union elections are up 27% since last year. There's more than double the petitions received in 2021 through the NLRB. But I think it's what we're really seeing here. You talk about threading the needle in fighting against just isolated movements in the labor movement. We're seeing, this is a revolution for the labor movement itself, with major unions like the UAW coming off of a corruption scandal, in the early 2021, I think that was, electing new leadership that empowered the rank and file workers they got one member, one vote, and then they go immediately and win massive wage benefits, all kinds of things in their strike against the big three, right? That was a result of putting the power in workers' hands. And I think that also another way you see that show up is, rank and file workers working through their unions to speak out against what is being perpetrated upon the people of Gaza in our name. You have 7 major unions that are coming out calling for a ceasefire and an arms embargo that's being led by the rank and file workers there. And even in, older, more conservative union, you had a ceasefire resolution that was passed kind of against the wishes of AFL-CIO leadership that they had to post anyway, because this is coming from the rank and file. So when you're talking about the corporate media may want to cover this as, isolated a few Starbucks stores here and there unionizing, or one place with Amazon and the ALU up at JFK 8. But really what we're seeing is working people finding their power, discovering that, and working through their unions to fight for the world that we want. And there's a whole world out there to win. And I think workers are going to do it, and we see it happening.
John, I'm glad you brought it up earlier, the NLRB issue. I saw Ro Khanna say it was an unforced error. I thought that was an understatement of the year, perhaps. But, maybe first and foremost, give people a sense of what the NLRB is. I think it's, one of these greatly important boards, but a lot of people don't know about it. And what happened with these 2 seats and the impact that could potentially have on workers around the country?
Yeah, if you don't know, all of these organizing wins that we're talking about, whether that's, brand new unions like Starbucks, or a brand new union at the ALU, or the UAW winning their record contracts, whether it's the culinary workers who just unionized won their first contract at the Venetian, so that the Vegas Strip is now 100% unionized. All these labor wins, they're taking place under rules that are governed by the NLRB, this agency, which is basically the referee between management and unions, overseeing how the mechanics of how all of these wins can work. It was possible, and I'm going to give a layman's view of this. Basically, what happened is, if nothing else happened, the NLRB was going to remain under Democratic control for another 2 years, under the current regime that has allowed so many of these, that has helped so many of these wins happen. And then, because Democrats and Republicans were deadlocked in a vote over whether or not that would continue, and the vice president wasn't able to come in and break the tie before Joe Manchin showed up and put it over into control of the Republicans. Now that's what's going to happen. We could have had favorable rule for 2 more years, the tie could have been broken by Vice President Harris, but it was not in time enough for Manchin to show up and do one last screw you on the way out. I'm sitting here in West Virginia. I want to say that the people of the state don't always necessarily align with their pro-corporate senator, but that's the basics of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like I keep asking a question similar to this, but it is because Trump's about to be president. And I think it's so interesting because, there's also, going back to the media issue, the way the media in the US, and again, this is a ruling class narrative, frames workers as like being naturally Republican or something, right? Those guys who just get their hands dirty and like Republicans really represent them because they're all just so socially conservative. But all that's to say, Trump's coming into office and he has tried to like appeal to the, average guy who like hates Democrats because the Democrats don't follow through on anything they say they're going to do. So I'm just kind of curious as we await Trump's ascendancy to office, what do you expect to see in the coming years, I guess, when it comes to the labor movement? I can't imagine it's going to become any less rowdy once Trump becomes president and Republicans take over.
It's tough to peer into the crystal ball and see anything but absolute doom. No, that's mildly a joke. I mean, the news is really depressing. But, one of the things that's on my mind is just a reconciling between these two forces. Public approval of unions is at, an all-time high over 60 years. People are being reintroduced to this. They're finding out that, hey, we can take power into our own hands. We don't have to wait around to win an election or count on politicians to actually do what they're going to say they're going to do. We can use collective power and collective action in the place where we sign our lives over to a boss for at least 8 hours of the day, and we can do this ourselves. That is reaching an all-time high. And, I go out and I cover culturally conservative areas of the country. The labor movement and fighting the class war and taking your power back, these are things that in my experience, Trump supporters are all about. The thing is, they believe that he's also about it as well. So I would look for a reconciling of those two things, because of course you can make a reasoned argument as to why Trump is lying about whose side he's on. He's from the billionaire class. He's always going to protect the billionaire class. And there's going to come a moment when his supporters who like the labor movement want to see things delivered that he is going to be unable to deliver. And that's why we see him lie so much. Oh, we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. We're going to take Greenland. We're going to, there's going to be sunshine and rainbows and blah, 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 blah. He has to just keep these lies coming so he avoids that moment of reconciliation where the people who are pro-labor movement and also Trump supporters are going to expect him to deliver on lines of class power, which he'll never do, and he'll just pump out more lies. I would wait to see when that dam breaks, because when I'm out there doing my job, I can see people from all sides of the political spectrum realizing that there's no politician that's going to come save us, and that the wins that you can really count on are coming from the labor movement right now.
I think that's so critical. And when you're out there doing your job, we really appreciate it, whether it's More Perfect Union, the Holler newsletter, which I hope everyone is checking out and sharing. We really appreciate you, John. And I have to say, good luck on Saturday. They got your Steelers as 10-point dogs. But hey, listen, I'm a Washington fan living in Baltimore, so I'd like to maybe see Pittsburgh get a little something. But nevertheless, really appreciate you, John Russell, for joining us here.
Wing and a prayer, baby. Go Steelers. Thank you.
Thanks so much, man.